We just wanna party, party just for you. We just wanna party, party just for you. I don't wanna die, party just for you. You ain't gotta dance, dance and shake your brain. We just wanna party, party just for you. We just wanna party, party just for you. I don't wanna die, party just for you.
This is America.
Imagine it is a challenging, difficult morning. George is on the scene in Florida where another community is in disbelief, shocked by devastating violence, this time at that Florida high school on Valentine's Day.
Jeremy Christian ranted as soon as he entered the courtroom.
Free speech or die, Portland. You got no safe place. This is America. Get out if you don't like free speech.
I'm sorry.
Christian is charged not with exercising his freedom of speech, but with stabbing to death two men who sought to intervene as he hurled racial abuse at teenage girls on a transit train.
We all want to help one another.
Teens
Human
wore a
beings are like
hijab.
that. We want to live by each other's happiness, not by each other's misery. We don't want to hate and despise one another. In this world, there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate, has goose-stepped us into misery and bloodshed. We have developed speed, but we have shut ourselves in. Machinery that gives abundance has left us in want. Our knowledge has made us cynical, our cleverness hard and unkind. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent.
The FBI is
and all will
investigating
be
yet
lost.
a new outbreak of
The aeroplane and the
threats
radio
against
have
Jewish
brought us
targets,
closer
including
together.
schools with
The
young
very nature
children.
of these inventions
There were
cries out
threats
for the
across
goodness of
several
men,
states today.
cries out for
Preschool
universal
children
brotherhood, for the
evacuated
unity of us
after a
all.
bomb threat. This
Even
Jewish
now, my
community
voice
center
is
in
reaching
Dayton,
millions
Florida.
throughout the world.
And it comes
Millions
after
of
hundreds
despairing
gravestones
men,
were
women, and
vandalized
children.
in a cemetery in
Victims of a
Philadelphia.
system that makes men
ABC's
torture
Gio Benitez is
and
in
imprison
Philadelphia.
innocent people.
As we come on the
Those
air
who
this
can hear me,
Sunday
I
night,
say,
America
do
is
not
just
despair.
now coming to grips
The misery
with
that is
what
now
unfolded
upon us is
here
but
in
the
the early
passing
morning
of
hours
greed,
here in
the
Orlando.
bitterness
A
of men
massacre
who
at a
fear
gay
the way
nightclub.
of human
Right here
progress.
behind me, you can
The
see
hate
the
of
sign
men
is
will
black and
pass,
white just
and
over
dictators
my
die.
shoulder here.
And the power they
And
took
at the
from the
center of it
people
all, a
will
lone
return to the
gunman
people.
in the middle
And so
of
long
that
as men
massacre
die,
called
liberty will
911
never
to pledge
perish.
allegiance to ISIS.
Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes. Men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men, machine men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are not cattle, you are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate, only the unloved hate, the unloved and the unnatural. Soldiers, don't fight for slavery, fight for liberty. In the 17th chapter of St. Luke it is written, the kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world, that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason. A world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!
Who you just heard speaking was Charlie Chaplin in 1940 and his message to humanity. This audio comes from his first film with sound, and the message he gave shakes the ears of the people walking this earth today. The message is so relevant and applies to the whole world, not just the US. In my senior Da Vinci class, we were all challenged to work on a project for the whole year. This is that? This past school year, I took a question that I feared and learned about it. It was nothing short of eye-opening. With all the hate that was happening around the election, and the hate crimes and hate speech towards other races, religions, and disabilities, the rates were at an all-time high. According to the FBI, 57.5% of the hate crime in 2016 was racially biased. In the US, that's the majority we see in the media, but the question I asked myself was, how is hate different in different places around the world? And why? It was no simple answer, but it had to start somewhere. The first thing I needed to do was define hate in my own words. This is one of the most difficult things in my project. I researched on every site and online dictionary to find the same definition of hate, but I didn't come across any. From there I thought, what if I found out a little bit more about where hate comes from and create my own definition of hate? I knew I had to find more information from around the world. From there, I contacted the connections that I knew from around the globe. I looked at Turkey, Japan, the Netherlands, Brazil, and our hometown, Newton and Boston.
Hermes, Linga, feed a village in Liberia. TMZ taking pictures causing mass hysteria. Mama see me on BT and start tearing up. Lamborghini chain, rest in peace in my superior. Hermes, Linga, feed a village in Liberia. TMZ taking pictures causing mass hysteria. Mama see me on BT and start tearing up. Ride with the mob, alhamdulillah. Check in with me and do your job. Berg is the name, and bullet the chain. Turn on for the watch. Prezi plain Jane, ride with the mob, alhamdulillah. Check in with me and do your job. Berg is the name, and bullet the chain. Turn on for the watch. Prezi plain Jane.
My name is Can Akil. I'm 16 years old. I'm going into 11th grade. I'm from Turkey. I live in Istanbul and I go to Hisar School. It's a local private school close to the place I live.
Define hate in your words.
There's a quote that I like. I think it defines hate the best. So they say people only hate the things that they fear the most. So I believe that if somebody fears someone or a specific object, then they are more inclined to hate it. So I don't really think that it's like the the most extensive point of not liking something. It's just fearing something and thinking that you don't like it just because you fear it. I think we do have hate here. Göktürk is a place where the income of people are a little bit higher, so most of them are a bit better educated. But still, I mean, when you get more educated, then you find better jobs, and then you have to, you're in charge of even more people. So when you talk to these people, and if you can't manage to communicate with them, then problems will arise, and hate will also be present. Right. So I think there is also hate in my town, but overall, I don't think it's as much as there is in Istanbul and in the capital city of Ankara, probably. Right. When people are more oppressed by their governments, then hate will just increase and fear will increase. So I think in Turkey, it's certainly more than maybe Northern European countries. In America, I don't really know for sure.
From what I know about Turkey, it is safe. It is Western and is constantly being developed. While Turkey has recently been under fire because of a corrupted government, I have never lived there and experienced the hate like the people who live there do. What I noticed was when Yiğitcan was talking, education was one of the most important things. The people who are educated in Turkey are not ones to be fearful of losing a fight, but also not ones to easily give up. Yiğitcan brought up some very important comments that hate is only there when someone else fears something or someone. In my research, what Yiğitcan said directly connects to how the human body interprets things and responds. Anger is one emotion that drives hate, but when I researched anger and how the brain looks under it, I found that chemically and physically, sadness, fear, disgust, and anxiety are all produced in similar parts of the brain. One of the lead scientists at the University of Valencia said, "Get angry, the heart rate, arterial tension, and testosterone production increases. Cortisol, the stress hormone, decreases, and the left hemisphere of the brain becomes more stimulated." Furthermore, I looked into what the brain looks like when it processes things like hate speech. When a thought is going through someone's mind, it takes more than one part of the brain to process it. While we always say hate is not conscious, part of it is, and part of it isn't. Going back in history, I found that hate was really just a survival mechanism. While we hate in fear of difference out of instinct, we also, in 2018, should be educated enough to understand that a Muslim, black, or transgender is no different than any other human. We, in 2018, all should recognize each other as humans and not as descriptions. Now, I understand for some people this is not an easy thing to accept because of their background. But no one was born out of the womb hating the opposite race, class, or gender.
Well, my name's Mark Alberding, and I teach at a university in Japan. I've been living in Japan for 15 years now, and previous to that was in the United States for several years, and I attended most of my elementary school, junior high school, and high school in Switzerland, Geneva, Switzerland, so I've lived in a few different places.
Okay.
Well, I think hate and hate speech are two different things, right? I mean, hate is difficult to define because it's an emotion. So maybe the easiest way to think about it is the opposite of love, and how do you define love, right? It's strong positive feelings for someone. I'm not even sure I could define it. So I don't know, hate, I mean very strong negative feelings towards a person or a thing. I think that's about as good as I could do.
Do you experience hate crimes in your city where you live?
No, I have never experienced anything even close to that where I live in Japan. And you know, I am a foreigner living in Japan, right? So I'm not part of Japanese society, and you know, I can't really speak as a Japanese because I'm not Japanese. So I have a perspective of an outsider somewhat, but certainly I would be aware of those kind of events happening. And there is a certain amount of hate-related activity in Japan, specifically hate speech, because up until recently there was no law in Japan that was specifically related towards hate speech. Mm-hmm. In the past couple of years, actually legislation was passed to outlaw hate speech, but prior to that it was very, very lax and undefined, you know, non-specific. Mm-hmm. And there have been a number of instances in the past several years of certain small groups, very nationalist and very anti-foreigners, specifically related or directed rather at Koreans. Mm-hmm. And so there have been marches in Tokyo, which is near where I live, that were specifically directed at Koreans and filled with hate speech, you know, really terrible things like, you know, all Koreans should die, and that sort of typical irrational hate speech. And so I would consider that that is something that's happened in the area that I live in. As far as hate crimes, though, I'm not aware of anything beyond that sort of hate speech in a structured march situation. Yeah. I've never heard of an actual hate crime where someone has committed violence that would be considered hate-based or hate-motivated.
Japan is a really peaceful country compared to America. The US has over 4 times as much crime as Japan does. From what I heard from Mark, Japan's main source of hate crime is hate speech, specifically towards Koreans. There is little to no violence in the country, which is a big difference from the US. I then talked to my friend Tim in the Netherlands to understand if 2 peaceful countries have anything similar.
I'm Tim Hiemink. I'm now 18 years old. I live in the Netherlands in a city called Voorburg. I'm going here to Dalton Voorburg, my school's name, and I'm now 6 VWO, 6 VWO, and you would call that in America 12th grade. Correct. I think last year, right?
Yeah, last year.
Yeah, okay. Last year of high school. And well, there's not too much bullying and hate in my school. Everybody's kind of friendly. Yeah, well, of course, not everybody has the same contact with each other. Like, not everybody's friends, but it's not like like popular kids are bullying the nerds or something, they're preventing contact, but there's definitely no hate. I'm now thinking in my Voorburg, my city. There's not too much. You don't see it very often. You sometimes see like a what's called driver from a van or something get mad at someone because they took the wrong turn or something. But if you will walk around 3 a.m. or something, you see some weird asses yelling everywhere. But on a normal day, nothing really happens. So that's all very chill. In the Netherlands, we don't have these extreme 2 sides, like I want guns, I don't want guns. We don't have a topic that really separates 2 parts of the country. Usually everybody is with some. If it doesn't happen, it's okay. Like, everybody respects each other, even though they think different in political view. It's really no issue over here.
A lot of other things with the notes. Okay,
talking to Tim about the Netherlands opened my eyes about how hate works over there. Education levels seem to be the main thing that Tim thought could affect the hate in the Netherlands. He talked about how not everybody had a connection, but it didn't mean that everybody hated each other. Politically, Tim talked about how there is not a strong left and right presence, just like in the US. And things seem to work out if there's a small disagreement.
So my name is Elena Langdon Portier, and I work as an interpreter and translator. I've been doing that for most of my professional career. I did work, I have a degree in broadcast journalism and worked in that a little bit, and then I got my master's in translation, and I've been doing that ever since. And I grew up in Brazil for the most part. So I was born in the States, but I moved to Brazil when I was a child and grew up in the south part of Brazil on an island off the coast, the very south of Brazil.
How would you define hate and hate crime and hate speech? And take your time.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you said that, when you first told me about it, I was like, okay, how is he defining hate?
Right.
I mean, I think it's easier to define hate speech and hate crime than hate. But, hate seems to be a lack of empathy and a lack of being able to see people for people and kind of just seeing them as the other, something that they don't, that you don't understand and that you don't like. And and it often is connected with fear. And so it's just that, inability to connect, I think.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I would call it hate, but there's a lot of, there always has been, and especially when I was growing up, there's a lot of separation between the classes. So in Brazil, it's more about what socioeconomic class you're in. There's a really huge gap between people that have money and people that don't, and there's a lot of poverty, and it's pretty entrenched and very intense poverty. And then you have a minority of people, like what we now call the 1% or whatever. But there's this huge gap, and so back then, especially in the 80s, there wasn't so much of a middle class. There was, much more of really poor people who are working for, people with a lot of money. And there's this huge clash and huge gap and a lot of fear of being mugged, of being robbed, of being, by these other people. I didn't grow up in a big city, so it was not that kind of a place specifically where I grew up, but in other parts of Brazil it already was. So it wasn't about, people being afraid of being robbed or mugged in my city. It's not like Rio now, for example, which people are just like, oh my God, it's awful. But there's still just a really big separation, and also kind of all this, completely politically incorrect stuff went on, right. Back then, where people just had no tolerance for, they do have tolerance for differences, but not in any kind of, not with words until it's somebody they know. So you know what I mean? A lot more name calling happens and happened. It's just a lot more, like, especially around homosexuality. It just kind of, that's an insult, and it, that's just like kind of the thing that everybody did. Yeah. Okay. And even like one thing that I still don't understand, but I remember, and the education that I received and that my peers received was very good education and definitely leaning towards socialism. And we were very aware of everything going on in the world. And it was somewhat anti-capitalistic education. But we took these symbols, like, we did not understand them at all. And so I remember when we graduated from high school, there's this tradition that if you get into the university, there's this big exam, and if you get into the university, men especially get their heads shaved. Huh. And so all of my male friends had their head shaved, and they shaved in like all these different symbols, like one was like radiation symbol. I think there was a peace symbol, but there was also like a swastika.
Oh, wow.
And I remember this being part of like what we did, and it had nothing to do at all with anti-Semitism. Like, it was not, it was really an ignorance of what that meant. Right. So again, I didn't grow up in a bigger city. There was not, that I was aware of, any kind of Jewish presence. Mm-hmm. And so we didn't know the weight of that, Yeah. So it was kind of just this, and I still to this day, like, I have a picture of it. I'm just like, oh my God, like, wow. This just, yeah. But it had nothing to, it was a symbol. And I remember doodling it, and I'm like, this is really hard to do. Like, I can never get the lines right. And again, it was like devoid of meaning, right. It wasn't about, that wasn't about hate. I think that was just more of not understanding the weight of it. So there was a lot of that, a lot of cluelessness, and I think some of it can't be forgiven, because there was just, you can't. I mean, we should have known. And I know also one thing that was always very big in Brazil, and we knew about in terms of violence and hate was against street children. It's always been a really big problem, like homeless children, and not where I grew up. I did not grow up in such a big city, and there wasn't that kind of poverty. But in the bigger cities in Brazil, there were incidences of several incidents of the children getting killed either by the police or by people getting burned, and then also against Native Americans, Native indigenous people in Brazil.
Right.
Those are some of the things that still happen, and it's like horrifying.
A lot of other things with the notes. Okay, I'll put that voice on.
Something I definitely did not think of was how important class is when it comes to how hate works around the world. Living in a lower class might mean having a different education in other countries. The different education changes the way people view the world, and thus we have disagreement, and eventually, hate.
Another thing that always frustrated me as a performing artist.
Yeah, my name is Joaquim Gaston. I do music. That's kind of what I do as my occupation, I guess. And I work at the Boys and Girls Club. Been working there for 3 years. So ever since I could work, that's what I've been doing. I'm from Boston, and I live in Boston. Because of the fact that I spend most of my time in Newton or at the Boys and Girls Club, and then after that I'm just home. For me, I don't really experience hate crimes because of the fact that I'm not in the position. That's not entirely true, but for the most part, I'm not in the position to experience a hate crime. Even though in Newton South High School, there have been some pretty sus stuff being said about people, and that those things could be racially motivated. They can be, motivated by gender. They can be motivated by all different types of things. And the things that they say could be considered hate speech. I remember when I was a freshman, a bunch of people, people that I just didn't know who'd be I don't want to put them in a box, but be considered the popular people of the grade. They would just make comments about how dark my skin was all the time, to the point where it was just something that I had to deal with because, being somebody who's dark and that's something that you can immediately see, I would just expect some type of joke made about me or some type of joke made about the fact that I'm a black person. So that's something that I've experienced in the past, but in terms of now and within my community, I don't really experience hate crimes, and I don't really see them too much. Older people who've been in Dorchester longer than I have, they said because especially with the United States, in the 80s and early 90s, with Reagan, Bill Clinton, and stuff like that. Things were a lot worse in terms of race and in terms of low-key segregation in Boston. That was an issue, and Boston is regarded as one of the most racist places in the United States, which is really weird because people from Newton or even people from Boston, the greater Boston area, they'll think about but everything's so accepting, and you don't realize it until you look for it to where you can see the underlying kind of not stigma, but kind of hatred's a strong word. I wouldn't use it either, but I don't know, just kind of
disrespect.
Yeah, disrespect towards minorities and people who get oppressed all the time.
Right. Yeah. So this question's really, I don't have an eye for it. No, I don't think anybody who has not committed a hate crime has an eye for it, but why do you think people commit hate crimes?
It starts with something that they don't have. And like, I think people do hate crimes because of the fact that, you know, like they're missing something. Because like, to make it really simple, like if there's a kid and one kid has a car that, you know, the other kid really wants, and like that one kid's been told, hey, you can't have that car, you know, that one kid who doesn't have the car is gonna be like really pissed that the other kid has a car, because like, hey, why do you get to have that car and I can't have that car? You know what I mean? So it's, you know, like I think it's that, but like way more complicated, because you have people, I wouldn't use Trump as an example because like obviously I don't know Trump's life, but like, you know, let's say like the case scenario for Trump is like his father wasn't in his life too much. He was always doing business. He was always doing, you know, just his thing, and like wasn't necessarily tending to a person like Trump, like to somebody who needed that attention. The reason why Trump does the things he does now, and like says the things that he does say now, is because of, you know, him not getting, you know, that love and care that he should have gotten when he was a kid. So yeah, I think hate speech and hate crimes, like, you know, stem from people just not getting things or being tended to in the way that they should have.
While talking to Joakim, I share the experience of living with hate crime and hate speech in Newton. But growing up in Boston, Joakim has seen and heard a lot of hate in the form of racism. He talked to me about looking beyond what we see in front of our eyes. While we see in southern states there tends to be more racism because of the history, there is racism wherever you go, as long as you look for it, even in Boston. What I realized after this year of studying Da Vinci was that hate has no place in our world. The things that we see on the internet and the media are representing very little of what actually is happening around the globe. A definition for hate is nearly impossible, and I've come to my conclusion after speaking with all these people around the world that hate is really different everywhere. But hate is also universal. There is no language, and while in Japan it could be ethnicity-based, Brazil has discrimination based on class. There really is no good or bad hate in the world. It's all just hurtful and disrupts society. A world without hate seems impossible, but if we just think before we speak, it may help a little bit.